Classic Trump. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been exploring how Trump's tariffs have been sparking some global market turmoil, getting everyone sort of thinking about what it's going to look like under this new regime. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going very well, better than the markets after Trump's first real announcement.
Well, and you say first real announcement, there's been a few appointments, or at least who is potentially going to appoint. We'll be getting some of that news through, and it's been very interesting. It's made for some of what's normally quite boring to watch to be quite interesting. So really great to talk about that today. You specifically talk in the article about this being classic Trump in quotes, where he announces bold plans and then escalates them. This has had an impact, as you've highlighted, on the markets. Do you think overall this strengthens or weakens the US's negotiating position internationally when we're going into this new term? They sort of know what to expect from the previous term, but also, there's new territory as well.
A lot of people are talking about it being a bad thing. Maybe if it's introduced, it'll be bad, but this is not the first time Trump's tried to put tariffs on Mexico. Canada, this is the first one, but Mexico, he tried to do it in 2018-19 and said, if you fix the border, we'll reverse this. They fixed the border, they never put it in. So he's signaled to Mexico and Canada 2 months out, fix this or else. And I suspect it's more an idle threat than anything else. So if you're asking if it increases negotiation, it seems to. That's exactly what it did last time. So, we'll see how quickly everyone reacts. Canada, 25% tariff will see their GDP drop between about 2 and 3%. They have a very high incentive because their economy is really struggling like Australia's at the moment for similar reasons. So they've got the easier job. They've got a more controlled border anyway. I think that'll inevitably happen. I'm more skeptical of Mexico. However, they've done it before. So, I'm not convinced this will happen.
And that's such a good point, because we know that's Trump's approach anyway. Like he's written books on it, that it's about negotiation. It's about the art of the deal. It's about, coming from a strong position. But like you said, we didn't really see that last time follow through. We saw the threats and then action taken. And if that action was taken, he did back off. So there's a little bit of, there was a craft involved. It wasn't just idle. There was actually skill involved in that, you would argue.
But I mean, I would say signaling's his thing, right? It's not enacting, it's signaling, and he's doing that. China, on the other hand, where he's proposing an increase of tariff of another 10%, I don't think that's signaling. I think that's likely. And there's always the argument behind China, which Europe's taken, which is that everything's being subsidized, therefore it's anti-competitive. I've argued for and against that. And then the second part of that is Biden didn't drop the tariffs. So, they're still there. So he's only increasing them. I suspect China's not a signal. It's just this is what's going to happen. Whereas Mexico and Canada, I think, is more signaling. And we'll see if they clean up their act before this happens.
Fair enough. And if we think about this, let's assume for a second that the tariffs do come to play more broadly, that it's not just a signaling. If we go down that sort of mental thought experiment, in the article, you talked about how this operated, particularly pre-1913, where you had tariff focus system that really made a big impact on the way the world operated. Do you think, well, firstly, can you maybe explain that to us a little bit, what happened then, but also, is that viable today when you think about the globalized world? Is it an outdated approach? Would it actually work?
The argument for a tariff is it promotes manufacturing within the US. Now, as far as Australia is concerned, we have 20 million people. There is no way we can competitively within the country manufacture all of our goods. America has 350 million odd people, and they're known to be competitive. Companies can change states to do different things to become more competitive against each other. It's inherent there. It's so big that maybe that anti-competitiveness that happened in Argentina when they had tariffs around the 1960s, 70s, they had very lazy industry because they're like, we've got tariffs, we'll just do what we want to do. You'd have one car plant, one plastic plant, because you've got 46 million people. The US has a lot more. There is an argument that they could have that competition within themselves, and it could, eventually reduce prices there. Well, not prices, but eventually maybe they'll come down to the world prices because they're allowed to compete internally, and the tariffs allow enough time for industry to build that they can. The argument against tariffs, is somewhere like Australia specifically, we're so small, we just can't do things at the same scale and size as China and America. There's no point putting one here. It might be a good thing in the US. I don't know. There's arguments for and against. They had them tariffs before about 1930. That's when they started reducing them. So in 1913, tariffs sat at about 40%. And that was when New York was the manufacturing hub of America, and they had trains going between buildings, and it was pretty cool what was going on back then. But then in 1913, they introduced a corporate tax rate of 1% and an income tax rate of 1% if you earned over $3,000 as an individual and $5,000 as a corporation. So they were funded off tariffs, and then they started introducing income taxes, which have just grown and grown and grown since. And if you think about how complex, tax systems are now, having a flat tariff certainly seems a lot simpler as an individual or as a company, because Trump is proposing reducing income tax hand in hand with this.
And that probably goes to answering a little bit of my next question, because while they might, when you think about tariffs, encourage domestic manufacturing, they also risk inflation. And you've touched on that already, but do you think Trump has thought this through, or at least in the proposal or what we know of the policies that are coming, that there are balances in place? Because obviously we've just come out of a high inflationary period, and we've seen the impact of that in economies around the world. Even the US, you could argue, a lot of the backlash against the Democrats was really over cost of living. So he really can't afford to go down that path again. And if tariffs traditionally have been inflationary, he kind of needs to have a counterbalance. Otherwise, it's just going to end quite quickly, I imagine, with a lot of outrage. What's your thought on that? Do you think that lessons have been learnt from the past in how to approach this?
I mean, we know that Trump wants to put tariffs on. We don't know what they're going to look like, but he's also at the same time said he wants to reduce income tax and corporations tax. If they're done hand in hand or on a scaled approach, it
could
should
be neutral.
Neutral. And the other, the major part of inflation in the world right now is government spending.
Yeah.
So, he's trying to introduce DOGE. So if they can cut $2 trillion off while they're doing it, they do cut income tax and corporation tax, then potentially, who knows what the inflation's going to look like. Really, I think that is a very hard model to do, because you are changing so much in an economy. Will it cause inflation day one if he puts a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico? Yes. But if you dropped income tax by 10, 20%, will it? Because people will have more, it will immediately increase that inflation, but people have more money. People won't feel it. It'll be a one-off, sugar hit, I've got more money, and bad luck, this costs more. So you'd think they would even out, but I mean, they're big changes quickly.
Yeah, and that is something. I mean, I'm a little skeptical when you talk about DOGE. The Department of Government Efficiency, this idea that they are going to be able to make massive cuts, because a lot of what I've read suggests that the biggest parts of those expenses are not really cuttable. But never put it past Elon and co to find a way if that's what they're determined to do. But it will. I just wonder if it's going to be a little bit like often what happens here. The new government gets in and says, "Oh, now that we've looked at the books, we realize we can't do all these things." And the books were all public; they could have read them the whole time. But I wonder if a little bit of that will come into play when the rubber hits the road, when they're actually in.
Or like the GST. Oh, we'll put the GST in. There'll be no more stamp duty on houses. Oh, actually, we need the stamp duty on houses.
Yeah,
Luxury
we didn't know when we were in opposition, but when we're in, we all of a sudden learned.
Stop it. Luxury car tax. Let's get rid of the Australian car manufacturing. We're subsidising it through the luxury car tax. Oh, wait, let's leave that.
Yeah.
So
to wrap this up, what just ballpark your feeling. Does this lead, or is there potential lead here through tariffs to a resurgence of manufacturing, a golden era? We've seen it can work if it's implemented correctly. Are you looking the bright side or the dark side here? Are you positive or negative on overall where you think this is heading?
If I look at China, who's had tariffs, but they've got economies of scale, which America has and other countries do have. I mean, America not to the same extent as China. Ultimately, any economy seems to do well or doesn't do well if people are happy. And so, will a tariff make people happy? Well, I mean, Trump's a pretty good marketer. So if he's going to sell something and keep people happy and, drop income taxes like he's proposing, that is ultimately the biggest thing I think that drives an economy and drives prosperity in the golden era. So if you can do that, it will be good. It doesn't, but if you look at China, a bit more doom and gloom at the moment, there's nothing, they do have tariffs, they do have manufacturing, and they're still doom and gloom. So that, it self-regulates the economy, and it creates consumers that don't want to spend. I certainly think that's going on in Australia at the moment. So yeah, I think it's up to the marketer as opposed to what the tax rules are.
Well, always a fascinating discussion, and we learn a lot. So thank you for your deep dive on that. We'll obviously keep watching as we get closer to inauguration, actually seeing how these policies unfold in reality beyond just the words. But thank you for your work as always, Alex.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll chat again soon.